Hi, everyone. Thanks for tuning in to episode 3 of Takeaways. My name is Patrick Searcy. I'm Director of Marketing for ALN Apartment Data, joined by the star of the show, Jordan Brooks, Market Analyst. How's it going, Jordan?
Doing well. How are you today, Patrick?
Pretty good. Let's start off by getting some big picture. The article this month that you wrote was called "Demand Returns in Q3, but Rent Growth Lags." So let's get a little bit of big picture before we get into some of the details.
I think we have to start with the supply and demand picture as kind of our big picture here. So new supply ramped up in the third quarter compared to the third quarter of last year. And that could have come at a bad time given what we've seen on the demand side earlier in the year. But the sort of fortunate part here was that the increase in demand actually outpaced that increase in supply. So we absorbed over 125,000 units nationally in the third quarter compared to about 90,000 in Q3 of 2019. So we did kind of see the reemergence of demand, and that was the big takeaway. Unfortunately, though, we did not really see that in the rent growth numbers.
Well, how much did that resurgence of demand in Q3 make up for earlier in the year when that demand was weaker?
As of the end of September, nationally, we're at about 70% of total net absorption compared to the same period last year. So we're still quite a ways off from the 2019 numbers. And that kind of just shows you what kind of hole we were in from earlier in the year. I mean, we had a really strong third quarter, easily outpaced demand from last year's third quarter, and yet we're still, 30% lower than last year on a year-to-date basis for demand.
What's the rent concession situation look like?
Well, generally in the second and third quarters, we would expect most of annual rent growth to come in those two middle quarters. This third quarter, we didn't really see that rent growth, and concessions were a pretty significant reason why. We saw an uptick both in the availability of rent concessions and in the average value of those concessions. So that for sure partially ate into rent growth. And we also saw increases in availability of concessions really across the board. So whether you look at stabilized properties only, lease up properties, across the price classes, for the most part, everyone pulled the concession lever to some degree.
You think that's likely to change anytime soon?
In the near term, probably not. Over the next 3 to 6 months. I mean, we're in the fourth quarter now. We're rounding into Q1 of 2021, and these are traditionally quarters that are a little bit softer for multifamily. So, like I said, in the next 3 to 6 months, I wouldn't expect to see any major drawdown in concessions on a national level.
There was a lot to unpack this month in your article. If you could just boil that down to your main point, like your main takeaway from all of that, what would it be?
I think it's that demand came back in the third quarter. That really is the takeaway. A lot of operators chose to just kind of defend occupancies with that demand instead of increasing rents. So we didn't see a whole lot of movement on the occupancy front or on the rent front. The main metric of change was net absorption. And I think that is the main takeaway. I mean, earlier in the year, the worst metric to look at for multifamily performance was net absorption. We were much, much lower than in typical years. And just to see that kind of come back in the third quarter and to such an extent to outpace so easily Q3 last year, that's definitely a good sign. And without that uptick in demand, given that we saw really no change in occupancy or rent to speak of, it's likely that we would have seen at a national level a little bit of regression in occupancy and in rent had we not seen that really strong net absorption number in the quarter.
Well, it sounds like you've got a lot to talk about. So tell us what's next for you with articles or upcoming appearances, webinars. What's going on?
So coming up on October 22nd, I'm going to be doing a webinar with Dr. Debbie Phillips from the Quadrillion. We're going to be looking at some recent performance and price class differences, what we're seeing kind of on the occupancy front and how that might deal with budget seasons and some of the implications for budgets. So that's coming up here pretty quickly. And then on our blog, which is at alndata.com/blog, Our next couple of posts really are just going to be looking at some more details of what we saw in the third quarter from a couple of different perspectives. And I should mention that webinar on October 22nd, if you check out our social media, you can find registration links for that.
Well, and speaking of, you can follow us on social media at ALN APT Data on Twitter. And you can also find us by searching for ALN Apartment Data on Facebook and on LinkedIn. We hope that you would join us, and we also hope that you'll hit that subscribe button that's just down here. And that way you don't ever miss any more of ALN's videos, particularly the takeaway series. Jordan, we really appreciate you taking the time to do this with us, and can't wait till next month. We'll hear from you then, okay?
Thanks, Patrick.